Hi, my name is Laura Briskman, an editor of statistics books at Springer, and I am here with author, social demographer, University of Virginia President Emerita, and University professor Teresa Sullivan. This past year, Dr. Sullivan published her latest book, Census 2020, Understanding the Issues. She has kindly joined me today to discuss the importance of the U.S. Census, as well as some of the challenges surrounding it. Dr. Sullivan, how are you doing today?
I'm very fine, thank you, and it's nice to talk to you.
Oh, thank you so much. We're just finishing up our decennial census in the United States, which requires that each American household answer a few questions. Why is it critical for American residents to respond to the census questionnaire?
When the United States Constitution was ratified in 1789, it required that there be a census every 10 years. And it was actually in the 6th sentence of the Constitution. It was seen as so important that to be a democratic republic, the representation had to bear some relationship to the size of the population. So while every state has 2 senators, the number of members of the House of Representatives is based on the population of the states. And that census has been carried out every 10 years since 1790. But a lot of things have changed since then, and one of those is that a great deal of money is distributed by the federal government to the states. And again, in the interest of being fair, most of that money is distributed by a formula, and the formula usually has some kind of population measure in it. Sometimes it's per capita, sometimes it's based on the number of children. Whatever it is, that information ultimately comes from the census. Today, about $1.5 trillion every year is distributed based on the census results. So that's why the census is so important. People get a lot from the census. They get political representation, and they get a return of their taxpayer money for projects in their local community.
So why did you feel it was so important to write a book about this information, providing it to the public?
Well, the U.S. Census has run into some problems in recent years, and this is not uncommon for social scientists collecting data. Response rates have dropped. People are busy. They are suspicious of people coming to their house. They worry about the data being misused. There's a lot of concern about privacy or maybe having the information hacked. And in the United States, where we have many immigrants, there's also been concern that the data could be misused against immigrants, either lawfully or unlawfully excluding them from the United States. So all those things meant that this census took place in an atmosphere of some contention. And that's why I thought it was important to help explain what some of the underlying issues are. And I hope to reassure people that they are safe in completing their census form.
Absolutely. And you know, your book does dedicate a significant portion of its discussion to underrepresented populations and the challenges involved in counting everyone. Could you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yes, so there is never a perfect census. There are always some people who are missed. If the people who are missed are just randomly distributed, it doesn't affect the results that much, but that's not what happens. What happens is that there are specific groups of people who typically get missed. Some of these people are hard to locate. So particularly in crowded inner cities, the Census Bureau may not know where every housing unit is. A housing unit could be entirely missed. Some people are hard to locate. We have a lot of gated communities in America, and the census enumerators can't get through the gate to interview people. Sometimes people can't be located because they only have a post office box and they don't have any other way to reach their address. Some people are hard to persuade. They're suspicious of the government for all kinds of reasons. Maybe they're doing something illegal, but they don't have to be doing something illegal. They can just be suspicious that the government is too nosy and shouldn't be intruding into their business. And then there's finally people who are just hard to interview. Many different languages are spoken in the United States. We have school districts where children go home to as many as 54 different languages being spoken by all the different families. And so being able to conduct the census in a language people understand is an issue. And while the form is translated into 14 languages, that might not be sufficient. So for all those reasons, there are people who are hard to miss, or who are hard to count. And then we've always had a problem in the United States with an undercount of children. And it's a little bit hard to understand that. Sometimes it's because young families get missed. They're mobile, they're more often moving from place to place. Renters are one of those groups that's often hard to locate. Maybe that's why we miss the children. But I think there's also another reason, which is when you're asked how many people live in this house, the parents don't always think of the child as a person yet.
Mm-hmm.
We have two people living in the house, and then there's the baby. And so the baby doesn't get listed. So this year there were particular instructions about including children. The other thing which happens now in the United States is because parents are working odd hours and so on, there may be grandparents taking care of children, and they don't know if they're supposed to report these children or not. Whatever the reason, we're trying to get a good count of children this year, so there's been a special effort there. And finally, I would say minority groups tend to be the groups that are most often missed, and that is because they're often lower income, lower education, more likely to be renters and to move frequently. It also includes the unauthorized immigrant population who may be more suspicious of government. So we do have an undercount there of minority populations. We're very concerned about that and would like to close that gap in this census and get all those people counted.
And in, I believe last year, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a proposal to add a citizenship question to the questionnaire, correct?
That's correct. Now, the reason that they struck it down is important to know. They did not say it was an illegitimate question to ask in the census. In fact, the United Nations recommends asking citizenship as a question. But the argument was that the administration had tried to put the question on the census under a pretext that involved basically giving Congress incorrect information. Mm-hmm. And so it was because of the pretextual nature that the court said it could not be added. Now, most of the statisticians and demographers who are familiar with this issue felt that adding the question was a bad idea. And the reason is because people are suspicious of the government. They worried that people would see this question and think, oh, my answer is going to be used to have me deported or something else bad happen. And so there was a feeling that asking that question would greatly increase the undercount, particularly of Hispanics. There was some pretty good experimental evidence to indicate this that was done from Harvard University. And then there were analyses done in the Census Bureau and elsewhere which showed that in just ordinary surveys that were being done, the citizenship question was the least likely to be answered, and that it was predominantly Hispanic or Latino respondents who would not answer it. So for all those reasons, it was considered to be not the right question to put on the census. And I want to again say there's nothing wrong with that question. It's just that in the context of increased immigration enforcement, that question took on an added significance that could have harmed the accuracy of the census.
That makes sense, yes. What are some challenges specific to this decade's census? You know, we're experiencing some new challenges in many aspects of our lives, but, you know, how are they affecting the census at all, projected outcomes and that sort of thing?
Yeah, there's one that we anticipated and one we did not anticipate. So the anticipated one was that this being a more digital census would make people more concerned about privacy and whether the data could be hacked or in other ways misused. This was the first census in which people were encouraged to respond online. And the personnel the Census Bureau sends out, if you don't answer your questionnaire, they'll send someone to knock on your door. Those people are using iPhones to record the information and send it in. This is a cost-saving measure. It probably improves accuracy because you don't have to go through so many steps to get the data entered into the database. But it also offers the opportunity for hacking, perhaps for phishing, people pretending to be the Census Bureau and getting the information, but they're not really the Census Bureau. So the Bureau spent a great deal of time worrying and thinking about these issues of how do you preserve confidentiality and privacy with the census data. And they came up with a number of solutions. Well, the problem we didn't anticipate was the novel coronavirus. And that's made everything about the conduct of the census much more difficult. So the official census date in the United States is April 1st. but the shutdown orders were taking effect in the United States principally around the middle of March.
Mm-hmm.
And so the normal follow-up that would go on happened when people were locked down. And so the Census Bureau extended that period of what's called non-response follow-up. But the other thing that happened is that now when the census enumerator does come to your door, people are reluctant to open the door. Even if you're wearing a mask and you've got a census badge on, they don't want to let you in. And the Census Bureau, for their part, is very concerned about the protection of their own employees so that they're not exposed to the virus either. So I think the virus has really complicated everything that the Census Bureau tried to do. It has certainly knocked the timetable out of whack. So there's, nothing is going on the schedule that was originally anticipated.
What are you going to be curious to watch for as the census results come in?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I think that there's been a lot of conversation that migration patterns are going to change as a result of the coronavirus. And we need baseline information to know if that's true or not. So the census will be an important baseline for that. Though the movement is not going to happen probably until once we get past the virus. But the argument is that so many people have learned they can work from home, means you don't have to live close to your office anymore. You could work where you want to work. You could live somewhere else. So that may be a big change that we're going to see. I'll be very curious to see how we do in terms of undercount, particularly for those populations that we know are especially vulnerable. I hadn't mentioned it, but one other thing that's occurring right now with the census is we have these terrible wildfires in California, Oregon, and Washington, where they're still trying to finish the census. And across the southeastern coast, we've had 2 hurricanes recently, and there's a third one coming in this week. Those things also make it a lot harder to get your data complete. So there'll be all those technical issues that I think we'll want to pay close attention to. But it's always just interesting to see how much the population has changed. We expect that this population will look much more diverse even than it did in 2010, with many more children from minority populations relative to the usual majority white population. I think there'll be a lot of interesting things that we will learn looking at this census. One thing I know that family demographers are interested in is how much more complicated family structures may have become, in part because of economic pressures, maybe because of the coronavirus. So more grandparents, their adult children and their grandchildren living together, more grandchildren living with grandparents without their parents there, and other complicated living situations with more multi-generational larger families living together. That will be interesting to watch.
Yes, that wouldn't surprise me at all, just based on, well, purely anecdotal evidence.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Sullivan, thank you so much for taking the time out of what I imagine is a very busy and interesting semester. And if any of our viewers are interested in learning more about your book, Census 2020, Understanding the Issues, it is available now at a number of online retailers, including Springer.com, Springer Link, Amazon, Target, and Bookshop.com.
Terrific. Thank you so much.